In 1927, Kazimir Malevich turned 48. By then, he had created his own direction in art, suprematism. He had students and was known all over the world, but had never been abroad. Finally, after numerous requests, the Soviet government gave him permission to travel to the West. Malevich visited Warsaw and Berlin, but was suddenly called back. 20 years after Malevich died, a film script was found among the papers he had left in Berlin with an inscription saying Vorhands Richter. Another 15 years later, a German artist and avant-garde director tried to film the script. We wanted to know how the story ended and went in search of the film based on Malevich's script. We could not even imagine how many discoveries awaited us. In 1929, Kazimir Malevich opened an experimental art studio at the Kiev Art Institute. He lectured on the new art, demonstrated abstract works, and offered the institute leadership new methods of teaching. And now there are no traces of Malevich's work here.
None of the instructors ever discussed it, and I learned about it with a bit of awkwardness during a partnership project between our academy and a Belgian institution, St. Lucas School. Once, I was tasked with meeting a Belgian professor. A young woman arrived, beautiful and intelligent. She was amazing, simply gorgeous. The first thing she said at Boryspil was, "Let's go see where he works here." I asked who. Malevich. I patted her on the shoulder indulgently and said, "Oh, come on, sweetheart. Tatlin, yes. Malevich, no." She gazed at me in a manner that left a lasting mark of shame within me. It's truly embarrassing. At that point, I was already a teacher, and honestly, I find it quite troubling. It's concerning when information fails to reach its intended audience. Why hasn't Malevich been admitted to the Academy yet? The sole portrait that was once here vanished a couple of days ago. This is quite puzzling. Why is this happening? There must be something that prevents him, or something else.
Very little was said about Malevich in the Academy. When I was a student here, almost every second teacher didn't believe in the black square and didn't even know why. To them it was kind of abnormal. Why? Why did the whole world know about the black square and why didn't they comprehend it? Well, I think it's because all my teachers had worked in Soviet realism. They were not artists. They stayed and abandoned being serious about art and came here to preach something else, not art. They were propagandists. So why should a propagandist know something about art? Those are very different things.
would have guessed? Who knew that he was there? What remains? Where have the students gone? What happened to the school? To the results? We know it was all wiped out, so this return, the surprising revelation of the archives provides an opportunity to consider how events might have played out a little bit differently. Yet what stands before me, a sense of denial. I observe that Malevich, a recognized classic for years, isn't widely embraced by the scholarly circles here. At the Academy of Arts, I observed firsthand how things truly appear. It significantly weakens the pillars of the socialist educational system and, by extension, our Ukrainian art school. And there are so few points of connection. Regrettably, this is a reality. This affects everything, including the terrible and dire situation in Kiev, as well as throughout Ukraine.
I am the beginning of everything, because my mind creates worlds. I am searching for God. I am searching for my own self in me. God is panoptic, omniscient, and omnipotent, the future perfection of intuition as the universal supermind. I am searching for God. I am searching for my image. I have already outlined the silhouette, and I want to embody myself. And my mind is a path for me to what my intuition has outlined.
This is the public records book of the Kiev parish of the Roman Catholic Church. Part 1 keeps the record of birth in 1879. Can I have a look? Yes. So, on the 1st of March, 1879, the baby was christened Kazimir in the Roman Catholic Church of Kiev. The sacral rite was administered by the Vicar Jordan Dobrovsky. The godparents were Boleslav Malevich and Maria Orzechowska.
Babies are still baptized in St. Alexander's Church in Kiev, just like Kazimir Malevich was 140 years ago. 12 children were born into the Malevich family, but only 8 survived. Kazimir was the eldest of 4 brothers and 4 sisters. Luckily, St. Alexander's Church was not destroyed. The walls that heard the cries of newborn Kazimir Malevich still stand.
The best attitude to Malevich would simply be an awareness of him as Ukrainian, as part of Ukraine. I think there is a struggle going on for the minds of Ukrainians for conveying the information about their heritage, about their roots, about their history. That is the history of ideas, not events. And Malevich is a great idea is our precious heritage and could also be a great source of power.
All his life, Kazimir Malevich believed that he was born in 1878. But researchers recently found an entry in the Church Registry of Births, which is kept in the Kiev City Public Archives. It shows that he was born a year later.
The son of the lawful spouses Malevich, born on the 11th of February of 1879 in Kiev.
The Dorotich Malevich family came from impoverished Polish gentry who had lived in Ukraine for at least 3 centuries. The artist's father, Siwerin, was the last in the family who had noble status. His mother's genealogy is still unknown, but she is believed to have come from a Ukrainian Orthodox family and converted to Catholicism before she got married, changing her name Ludmila to Ludowica.
He was born into a noble family of Polish Catholics, but he didn't have the noble status because it was taxed in the Russian Empire as part of its discriminatory policy, and Malevich's father couldn't afford it. Not being noble meant being on par with the lower classes, like peasants. At that time, there were no Poles among peasants in Ukraine.
2 of Malevich's uncles took part in the Polish uprising of 1863, leading to the family's loss of nearly all of their privileges. Originally a prosperous Polish noble family residing in the Venetia region since the 16th century, they fell into poverty and had to work in local factories. Luckily, the father's older sister, Maria Orzechowska, made a good marriage. She had numerous siblings, all of whom lived with her. She supported and cared for them, offering help and assistance in their lives.
Until now, it was believed that the young couple lived in Kiev, on Bulyonska Street, in the house of Kazimir's aunt, Maria Orzechowska, and that their first son Kazimir was born in the same house. However, the filmmaking team discovered new facts. The house on Bulyonska Street was shown in the early 70s by Malevich's youngest sister, Victoria Zaitseva, as she remembered it. This address has never been confirmed by any documents. We were lucky to find documents proving that from 1871 to 1889, Maria Orzechowska owned one estate in Kiev, and it was on Gilianska Street. Later, she lived on Bulyonska Street address, but her house had a different number. It is probably this house that Victoria remembered from her early years, although there was no trace left of it by the end of the 70s.
Elenskiy. Great, I think we found the house where Malevich lived.
Both Bulyonska and Gilianska streets were in the area called New Development, where the first houses were built in the 1830s. There were mostly typical 2-story yellow brick houses. Perhaps that is why Victoria made a mistake in mapping her brother's birthplace decades later, when old houses had been replaced with new ones, and only few old buildings remained on those streets. Now we know the real address of Maria Orzechowska's house, where Kazimir Malevich was born. The archive contains 3 reconstruction designs, and comparing the maps of different years, we were able to pinpoint its location on Gilianska Street and make a virtual reconstruction with the help of computer graphics. There is nothing left of the house. In its place stands a modern residential complex, but we know exactly where one of the world's most famous residents of Kiev was born.
His father had jobs in different Ukrainian cities, which meant he was always on the move. Despite this, he is incredibly talented. He attended an agricultural school in Ukraine for just 2 years. Can you imagine that? Agricultural school.
The family lived in different Ukrainian villages where Kazimir's father worked in the management of sugar factories. It was seasonal work, and the large family moved from one village to another every year or two.
The circumstances in which I lived my early years were as follows. My father worked in sugar mills. They were usually built in distant wilderness, away from cities and towns. I spent my childhood years in those villages scattered across beautiful landscapes. Sugar plantations stretched endlessly, even beyond the horizon, descending to small meadows or climbing hills, capturing villages and farmsteads in their green fields, covered with the monotonous texture of leaves. It was this background that cultivated my feelings for art, for painting.
The house in Parhomivka, in which the Malevich family probably lived, stands on a hill above the sugar mill, a few hundred yards from the entrance. The ground floor was occupied by several families, and the upper floor has been used as a hostel until past few years. Now its only inhabitants are old memories living in abandoned things and old amateur paintings in the attic, which the locals say are young Malevich's exercises. The dilapidated wall of the house is decorated with a portrait of Kazimir Malevich. Local enthusiasts printed out a poster and put it in a neat frame.
I recall a herd of cows passing through huge puddles on the village street after a rainstorm before sunset. I stood petrified and watched fragments of clouds sailing through the disk of the sun and the sun rays squeezing through the torn tatters of clouds and reflecting on the calm surface of the puddle. When the water was broken by the hoofs of the cows, it rippled, and the cows reflected in it too. After a while, I started to paint the mountain with ink on a sheet of paper. But all the forms merged, and there was a stain that did not depict anything. Meanwhile, the negatives were glowing in my brain. The sun rays were burning brightly in the puddle, the trees were shining, and the cows were walking in the negative of a motion picture before my mind's eye. I liked to walk and run in the forests and on the high hills where I could see the horizon around. It's all still in me. I was amazed by the landscape, and so was my father. Like me, he loved the changes in it. But we were silent, because all we could say to each other was the word, good. What was this good, and why? We had no words for it. And now, exactly 40 years afterwards, I am trying to learn the meaning of this word. And I am still not sure if I understand it.
Formally, it's history, no longer present, yet its concepts feel current. In the West, it's revered even more than Picasso. Artists often ask, why is that? Picasso is a genius. Indeed, he's a genius, but today, Malevich inspires us more.
Resembled some kind of fortress where people worked day and night, obeying the inexorable call of the factory whistle, sometimes chained to the apparatus or machines. 12 hours in steam, in stinky gases, in mud. I remember my father as he stood by the big apparatus. My father stood there for hours turning the taps and looking into the little windows. From time to time, pouring the sweet liquid on the glass and carefully examining it to see the size of the sugar crystal. To me, to a little boy, those machines always seemed predatory beasts. I looked at them as if they were wild, merciless animals that were only waiting for their master to make the wrong move, and then to crush or maim him.
During his childhood and teenage years, he was bilingual, speaking Russian at home and Ukrainian with friends on the streets. Not Russian. Malevich once noted that artists visited their village from St. Petersburg to paint the church, and they would eavesdrop on them. They spoke Russian. Malevich wrote, indicating that the language was foreign to him. That was his reality.
I wanted to be friends with peasant children. One day, I got so mad at the factory guys that I declared war on them. I hired an army of peasant boys. I paid each of them with a lump of refined sugar. I'd stolen a whole pound of it from the closet. The fight lasted all day until they knocked the factory guys out of the fence. It was a hot thing. At home in the evening, my parents took off my pants and Dad spanked me. I suffered disgrace, but felt like a hero. The village folks were engaged in art. I didn't know such a word then. I only liked the things that they made. That's the secret of my sympathy for the peasants. My mother did all kinds of embroidery and lacing too. I learned this art from her, and I also made embroidery and crocheting.
Jean-Claude Macade mentioned that Ukrainian folk art might be among the richest rural arts globally. Additionally, villages were crucial to the entire avant-garde movement. So what did avant-garde artists adopt from rural life? The sense of rhythm, repetitions and rhythms, the fundamental elements of their folk art like circles, crosses and squares are core features. These elements, however, are often intensified to an awe-inspiring degree.
With great excitement, I watched the peasants paint and helped them to spread clay on the floor in the house and paint ornaments on the stove. The village women perfectly painted roosters, grasshoppers, and flowers. All paints were made right there from different kinds of clay and smalt. I tried to bring this culture to the stove in my home, but it never worked.
You know, Malevich's private life and art life were quite different. In everyday life, he was very fastidious. He liked to eat well. By the way, when he described Ukrainian cuisine in Konotop, he noted that one could buy sausage and bacon there, that the local food was delicious and very cheap, and that life was very good for him there. He recalled it when he was old. Well, actually, he didn't live to old age. He died at 56. He wrote this when he was in his early 50s and starving and not at all comfortable. He remembered that brilliant world of his childhood and youth. He was very fond of Ukraine and its amazing clothes, the way girls dressed when they went to a wedding party, guys wearing white trousers with sashes and sheepskin caps, the bride who was just like a decoration, a work of art, the way they danced and sang. When he couldn't sleep at night, he looked at the moon in the window. He wrote, "The Ukrainian night is so black, so beautiful. You wouldn't find a night like this anywhere else in the world, in the whole world."
I loved the moon. It kept a lot of young people awake, and me too, although I was not a young man yet. When everyone in the house went to bed, I always opened the curtain and gazed at the moon. I let the sounds of songs sung by girls and boys into my window. I listened with great pleasure. watching the Ukrainian sky with stars burning like candles.
He had a foundation in music and a vivid color palette. Both were set from the start. His musical aspect is noteworthy, particularly his friendship with Rozlovets, a brilliant composer who later turned avant-garde in Russia. Together, they founded a choir and performed in churches.
Kazimir Malevich and Mykola Rozlovets met in Konotop in the mid-1890s. Rozlovets had musical talent, but his parents did not support it. Then Ludowica Malevich bought a violin so that her son's friend could learn music. Later, Malevich and Rozlovets came across in Kursk and Moscow. Rozlovets was Malevich's only friend from childhood to death.
His father was a technician, a materialist, and his mother was a religious woman who always looked to heaven, divinity, and all that. And he lived in the urban cultural environment of an industrial town on the one hand, and in the environment of religious rural culture associated with nature, tradition, and color on the other hand. The town was black, gray, and mechanical, while the other side was spacious and full of color and beauty. These two layers lived and combined in him all the time. But the most interesting thing is that he rose above all that, leaving behind and below town and countryside alike, and came to his own harmony of the universe.
At that time, all sugar mills had a connection with Kyiv once a year, when there was a big annual fair. Those fairs were usually called contracts. My father also went to those contracts as a highly qualified sugar boiler, and he took me along. That's how I got acquainted with the city and its life, as well as with the art displayed in the windows of stationery stores.
Malevich recalled that his first paintings were copies of works by famous artists. He copied them from color reproductions published in the Neva magazine, the most popular illustrated publication in the Russian Empire of those times.
My father was not quite pleased with my craving for art. He wanted me to follow in his footsteps along his line. He told me that artists led a poor life, and most of them were in prison. And he didn't want his son to share their lot.
His first professional teacher was Pimonenko. Strange as it may seem, throughout his life, he painted pictures in what we call Pimonenko style. There was something nostalgic about them. Being a suprematist and abstractionist, he remained a comprehensible artist. In many paintings, we can see the Pimonenko motifs. When I show Pimonenko's works to my foreign friends, they say that he is a good artist, that is for sure, but one of many in the world. But when I tell them he is Malevich's favorite teacher, oh, that's where Malevich's peasant women with rakes come from. The style is suprematist, but the proportions, composition are similar. They are Ukrainian, clearly and indisputably.
When I came to Kiev, I got acquainted with Pimonenko. His paintings impressed me greatly. I was shocked by everything I saw in his studio. A lot of easels with canvases depicting Ukrainian life. I showed him my works, my sketches from nature. I was admitted to the Kyiv Art School.
The first art school in Ukraine opened at the initiative of Mykola Murashko, an artist and teacher. Anyone who was talented, regardless of sex or social background, was admitted. They were taught by such outstanding artists as Mykola Pimenenko, Mikhail Vrubel, and Karaton Platonov. Malevich was not matriculated, but he could attend the art school on a non-credit basis. His course did not last long. In 1897, the family moved to Kursk in Russia. There Kazimir Malevich worked in a local railroad department and used every spare minute to paint. Later he moved to Moscow, where great art thrived and where he had the chance to become Kazimir the Great. Very soon, Malevich was in the heart of artistic life and undertook to develop his own direction in art. In several years, Malevich independently mastered all new art trends, so named isms, as he later called them in his theory. He was an impressionist, cubist or cubo-futurist, expressionist, fauvist and symbolist. But none of those isms satisfied him. He was looking for something else, something that would forever inscribe his name in the world history of art. He was looking for his door to another space. In the mid-1910s, Malevich worked in the Cooperative Craft Society of the village of Verbivka. Here, Alexandra Exter, the Amazon of avant-garde, who also came from Kiev, combined folk art and avant-garde itself. Local women made embroideries according to sketches by avant-garde artists. It was these folk masters who were the first to see suprematist works by Malevich.
I was surprised to learn about this theater. It seemed very consonant with some of Malevich's ideas. For example, Les Courbas, as an innovator, said that the theater should return to its initial forms and primary elements, and we actually saw it there. That is, not a life story as such, but primary elements. They are the characters of some primary forms, the substances that directly affect you. Works of Malevich are used in the play. They are divided into sliding layers. That's the basic technical idea of the project. I used the basic forms, squares and circles, to convey the idea to the audience. It was important for me to make the audience feel the presence of God, knowing that Malevich was in search of God in his inner world.
years before his Black Square appeared, Malevich worked on the stage design for the first futuristic opera, Victory Over the Sun, along with Mikhail Matushin and Alexei Kruchorny. One of the design sketches featured a shape suggestive of a square. Later, the sketch prompted Malevich to create the painting that crowned the completion of a major stage in the history of art. 1915 was the most important year in Malevich's creative career. It was when he painted his famous Black Square, which became an icon and symbol of the new trend called suprematism.
It's hard to imagine an avant-garde or neo-avant-garde artist unrelated to Malevich in one way or another. What I mean is there are many interpretations, but this is the attainment of the 0 point in art. That is, this image can be regarded as a verbal picture of religious experience, not in the sense of a particular religion, but in the context of God. After all, it's impossible to see God and stay alive. This mystery is filled with a very deep content.
He reportedly neither ate nor drank throughout the entire week, yet he failed to grasp his actions. The Black Square painting symbolizes a complete eclipse, a total eclipse of the material world, suggesting everything human is absorbed by the divine. He's not a theologian, but a painter. Thus, even if he names it an icon, it remains an artistic icon, not a religious one.
When Malevich came up with his square as a primary element, humanity didn't know yet about the binary code. But looking back on most of his works from the present day, we can see auguries of the new computer age which humankind is entering. You know what the binary code looks like. 1, 0, that's exactly a black square, the 1 in the 0.
People always demand that art be comprehensible, but they never require their own minds to adapt to comprehension. It's quite natural that you don't comprehend it. If you are only used to a puddle jumper, you will never understand the emotions and impressions of someone who travels by train or flies in the air. One formal approach to the universe does not enable man to live in full coherence and harmony with the universe. The formal method reveals the form of a phenomenon, but not the essence, not the spirit of it. For the form, the color, and the spirit are different states of energy. The totality of these states is the universe in which my life is destined by constant connection with or constant sensation of the spiritual side of the forces of the universe, both within and without the image. Man's fusion with the universe occurs not in form, but in sensation.
Space is a very important element of his suprematism. He calls a white background space. Even though there is no perspective, no visible distance. Why is it space? And what kind of space is it? This is not the actual earthly space that our eyes see every day. It is the cosmos, the sensation of the cosmos. Why is it white? Well, just because it's filled with some special light. And therefore, the cosmos, being completely inseparable from Malevich, is permitted with mysticism.
We don't know what color belongs to the Earth, Mars, Venus, the Sun, or the Moon. We don't know if color is something necessary for the existence of the world. Color is the creator of space. Space is the key word. Painting, paints, colors. They are embedded in the human body. They can flare up gloriously and demandingly.
Already in 1915, during his 15th year, he crafted the Red Square, which he described as peasant realism in 2 dimensions. I perceive a distinctly Ukrainian humor here, not Polish in the slightest. You can tell because Polish humor tends to be sarcastic. Every gesture or humorous expression he makes carries a very serious undertone. He appears to speak humorously, yet in truth, he's quite serious. The red color symbolizes the peasant world. As for the white, it marks the end, the culmination. White on white represents a non-objective world or eternal peace. This name, I must say, has a theological nuance, eternal peace. Consequently, Marxists criticized him, with some labeling him a theologian, a mystic, and so on. This is everything and nothing. Nothing is everything, and everything is nothing. It mirrors Buddhist philosophy. He certainly read literature, and he spoke of Hindu and Buddhist texts, noting that they should be read. Before 1914, when discourse on the new yoga was in vogue. It was really popular back then, in those years, and so he suggested engaging in it and then taking a laxative to purge it all.
Along with the new forms, there was an awareness of the new role of art in society. Artists no longer observed the world, but transformed it with artistic means.
Well, I think Malevich is a very important artist for the history of art. If you look at the development of the history of art, then you see that he's a key figure, not only in inventing abstraction, but also in developing ideas about how art should function in society. He was thinking about the economic function of art. And it is not the function to sell works of art. It's the function of how art should be in society, what it should do. So I think he's a very visionary man, and he's not only important in respect to what he did, but also in the respect of what he was thinking about.
Dresses are inspired by Malevich. Clients simply buy them and wear them, and sometimes with a rather interesting and fascinating story behind the purchase. For example, I would say a new friend of mine, she is from Switzerland, said she was buying this dress to pass it down to her daughter. I feel that his influence on design, it's global. It's because everything he did in painting, which he called non-objective art, all of that later showed up in countless objects. I believe he touched every area of design, including fashion. To me, he's first and foremost a global artist, that's for sure. And of course, I really relate to the scale of his ambition. It's something worth learning from. Often, ambition pushes an artist to do things they may not even feel ready for, but that drive leads to something incredible.
After he created his suprematist cycle, Malevich abandoned the brush and took up the pen, a sharper instrument to penetrate the brain. Mark Chagall invited Malevich to teach at an art school in Vitebsk in Belarus. For the next several years, he taught painting to a student team named UNOVIS, the Russian acronym for Founders of New Art. He even named his newborn daughter, Una.
I am very interested in the period when Malevich was working in Vitebsk, in the first revolutionary art school, and he was working there together with Chagall and Lutskiy and other artists. And they had a very interesting art educational project, how to spread the new idea of art. So Malevich did hardly any paintings there. He didn't work as a proper artist. He was thinking about how to deal with the education of art. So what should artists learn in order to be really good and also revolutionary artists? He wrote a lot, and Lutskiy, his fellow artist and fellow professor in the art school, was helping him to publish it. And if you read what is in those little editions, and there was a shortage of everything. There was a shortage of food, there was a shortage of paper, there was a shortage of everything. But they did it anyway. So this is a very inspirational moment to look at in art history, because we tend to think that we are in crisis now in the world. And of course there are crises, but in that time, during the Civil War, the situation was much worse than we are experiencing here in the West now.
In the early 1920s, inspired by promises of a new life, Malevich and his students moved to Leningrad and began to change the world by means of art. They materialized their theoretical research in color and form at the State Institute of Art Culture, making dishes, clothes, furniture, and other articles of mass consumption. Everything seemed right and promised to be even better. However, after Lenin died and Stalin came to power, the situation changed dramatically and very soon ended up in a tragedy. The press started harassing Malevich. The Institute's budget was cut until it was closed down. Nobody bought paintings, there were no exhibitions. Books and articles were not published. So much disliked by the Soviet leader, leftist art went silent and froze. Some of the artists managed to emigrate, others were arrested. But many of the innovators found refuge in Ukraine, where they could create freely, even if not for long. Digger Vertov, who, like Malevich, was persecuted in Moscow, moved to Kiev in 1927. Malevich was the first to comprehend Vertov's unique artistic language and note his innovation.
Supporting Vertov during that period was truly a remarkable endeavor. Only someone who recognized their own influence and importance in the art world, and who understood how revolutionary Vertov's work was, could afford such a bold stance for their own reputation. Malevich evidently managed to take such a step and publicly endorse him. This spirit of protest, which was so vividly expressed in Vertov's work, was also inherent to Malevich. If we draw parallels, it becomes clear that even before possibly relocating to Kiev, Malevich was aligning himself with the new generation. He found the aesthetics of this movement appealing. Likely, he was drawn not only to the aesthetics, but also to its political stance, which advocated for art free from market constraints.
In Moscow, artists are groaning. There are no jobs at all, and no subsidies either. This is the end. This is the end of everything. Komisarenko, the animator, is coming. We should make a good suprematist film together. I am leaving on Monday. The ticket to Warsaw is in my pocket. 40 rubles, fare and baggage. My sadness gives way to a hope that everything will be all right when I get to Warsaw. The exhibition is tiny, just 30 canvases or so.
Our film crew followed Malevich's track to Poland, Warsaw. Unfortunately, the station where Malevich arrived in 1927 was destroyed during Second World War. So was the city's old part. And now it only exists as a reconstruction. Surprisingly, the Hotel Polonia, where Malevich's personal exhibition took place, survived. And it even looks the same. Here we met Iwona Malevich.
I'm Iwona Malevich, the granddaughter of Kazimir Malevich's brother, Antonia. Born and raised in Warsaw, I've spent many years here, with Malevich being central to my life. She appeared on camera both laughing and crying, sharing family stories about her grandfather's encounter with Malevich in Warsaw on the day he was leaving. In that moment, she got quite emotional and even shed a tear as she recited Malevich's poems to us. She believes that her life's mission and her purpose should be truly dedicated to the promotion and study of projects connected to Malevich's work. Among a sizable family of 37 heirs, she is the sole individual who publicly identifies herself as a descendant of Malevich. I know, for instance, some descendants in Moscow and a family in Kiev, and they absolutely refuse to be seen in public anywhere. Come with me. That's the call of every leader. But what does it really mean? When you follow a leader, where do you ultimately arrive? Naturally, at his side. And after he's gone, he becomes a symbol.
We were lucky. In the hall that housed Malevich's exhibition, there was a beautifully laid table that looked like in a photo of 90 years ago, when the Polish Cultural Society threw a banquet in honor of the famous artist. Polish researcher Andrzej Turowski made a visual reconstruction of Malevich's personal exhibition in Warsaw. In addition to paintings, Malevich demonstrated theoretical tables, his and Matushin's.
An exhibition was held, followed by a formal reception attended by cultural figures from Warsaw and Poland, and numerous other artists. A humorous incident occurred there at the reception. He made a sort of joke, always eager to stand out. He showed up at the event seemingly half asleep, with purple women's stockings adorning his neck in place of a tie. That was his choice of neckwear.
The exhibition was a success. Malevich had appointments and audiences with important persons. Those several weeks in Warsaw were very busy, and Malevich didn't even have time to see his brother Antony.
My grandfather, Antony, he had long wished to reunite with his brother, yet this was constantly postponed due to Malevich's busy schedule. filled with appointments with artists and students. Finally, on the day Malevich was set to leave Warsaw, they met at the train station. They only managed to converse briefly as Malevich was already on the train. Overcome with emotion, he shed a few tears, wiped them with a handkerchief and handed it to his brother.
Then there was Berlin, a visit to the Bauhaus, the publication of the German program work by Malevich, and another personal exhibition. Fame raced ahead of the artist. In his letters to his family, he wrote about red carpet receptions.
What is good about exhibiting my works in Germany is that they will become known to the whole world. My opinion is taken as an axiom. In a word, fame walks hand in hand with me. But the Germans have one shortcoming. They never bother to strew the laurels with coins. They think that such a famous artist is surely well-heeled.
When Herr von Riesen called me in Berlin and asked me, the suprematist painter Malevich wanted to visit me. So he came. Rang the door and entered a small, very strong man with dark brown eyes and greeted me, Uhland. Now, it doesn't mean anything because Uhland is a German poet. And accidentally, it was the prefix of my telephone number. At that time, they had still names, like, for instance, Connecticut had Congress, so-and-so. So from that time on, he always greeted me with Uhland because he couldn't speak German, not a word. Anyhow, with the help of Herrn von Riesen, we discussed the project, which was in his mind, to make a film of his suprematist principles. And he had seen my films before, my abstract films before, and he wanted to have the film made exactly like my films. The original Malevich manuscript. I have the manuscript. As a matter of fact, it's drawn in Malevich handwriting in Russian. And later on, he translated it, Herr von Riesen translated it into German with the drawings made by Malevich. So I was supposed to make the film as soon as possible. As soon, that means as soon as there's color. At the time, there was no color film. There was a lot of discussions going on that we would have color film. But for the moment, there was no color except you could paint the celluloid. But it wasn't, it's not a very nice procedure. And it never came out exactly.
Next, Malevich was going to travel to Paris, but suddenly he received a telegram, the content of which is unknown, and had to immediately return to the USSR. He quickly made a will and left all his paintings, records, and teaching materials in Berlin to wait for his return. Alexander von Riesen recalled, "On the 27th of May, Malevich came to my father and handed him, with his usual solemnity, a voluminous, well-bandaged package. He asked my father to keep it for him. He hoped to come again next year. If he did not, and if he were not heard of for the next 25 years, we could open the package and dispose of it at our discretion.
In the event of my death or innocent imprisonment, and if the owner of these manuscripts wishes to publish them, they must be studied and then translated into another language, because as a result of revolutionary influence, they may have significant contradictions with the form of protection of art, which I have now in 1927. These principles shall be deemed valid. Malevich, 1927, the 30s of May, Berlin.
Malevich never traveled abroad again. His canvases and archives miraculously survived the war and ended up in museums. So did Malevich's script, that was never screened. Film director Hans Richter moved from Germany to the United States, where most of Malevich's archives are kept. We were lucky. In the archive of the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles City, we found the film which Richter and his pupil Arnold Eagle made after Malevich's script.
Hi. So this is the Arnold Eagle archive.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is box 4.
And this is.
And this is the folder that you requested.
Oh, great. Storyboard. I have only seen this one in the book, and this is the original one. And the colors are very different. And all the details. This is the original one. Yeah, this is based on Malevich's script solely. Interesting. Thank you.
When Hans Richter took on the film, he used Malevich's original script, but he decided to combine it with his own film. His film, Rhythm 25, had been lost, and Richter decided to use this opportunity to restore it. He inserted his part in the middle of the film, made after Malevich's script. It was probably his biggest mistake, as these two parts were obviously very different and didn't make the film integral at all. The film was never shot in Richter's lifetime. Interestingly, this archive even keeps the negatives made during the filming in the 70s.
Hans Richter prepared a storyboard and a detailed shooting script based on two films, Malevich's and his Lost Rhythm 25. The film was almost completed, but at the final stage, when the music was being written, the work was frozen. Richter died, and the film remained unfinished. The Getty archive still keeps the edited parts and materials for the film.
Okay.
Well, let's start with the square.
You started with Lutskiy. This is the things I gave you first, I remember.
These were the first ones we got, and we really started on the square, thinking that as for Malevich stood for the square, and I think that it is motto, the symbol.
Based on Malevich's original script and Richter's storyboard, using computer graphics, we tried to reconstruct both films. After he returned from Berlin, Malevich went to Ukraine to visit his relatives. In Kiev, he met with Andriy Taran and Lev Kromarenko, the artists he had met before. At their request, Ivan Vrona, rector of the Kiev Art Institute, received permission from the People's Commissar of Education, Mykola Skripnik, to invite Malevich to teach at the institute. To the students and teachers, the arrival of the famous artist and professor became a big event.
The meeting was held. The professors panicked a little, but maybe it will turn out well. I think within 10 days, the research office will be organized. The rector pays great attention to this matter.
Malevich treated his students infected with realism and chromophobia. He drew the window curtains and showed them reproductions of works by Western artists with a projector. There were abstract paintings on the walls.
In Malevich's educational framework, he aimed to transform the student into an investigator. Many struggled to understand this pedagogical approach. The challenge arose from their insufficient preparation and training levels. Most students didn't advance past cubism and never embraced suprematism, either as a methodology or a theory. Relevant documents from Kiev, tied to the final phase of Kazimir Malevich's teaching career, are particularly intriguing. At this stage, Malevich had fully developed his system, clearly grasping the objectives and effectively guiding his students' research endeavors.
Little was known about the artist's period of life in Kiev until the publication in 2016 of materials from Marian Kropivnitsky's family archive concerning Malevich's work at the Art Institute. Kropivnitsky was an assistant fellow at Malevich's research office. His daughter found more than 70 pages in his archive, including minutes of meetings and notes of Malevich's lectures. In 1918, Malevich left the brush for the pen and was primarily an art theorist and teacher for more than a decade. He returned to painting, and not just simply to it, but depicting the object-bearing world. There could be several reasons. One of them was his desire to present his creative record at his Jubilee personal exhibition, since he had left most of paintings in Germany and they were not available. However, a number of works had no analogues in his earlier creative period. This new style, called supranaturalism, combined geometric abstraction and objectification. There appeared a second peasant cycle in which Malevich depicted silhouettes or schematic figures of peasants, often handless or faceless. The exhibition at the Kiev Picture Gallery in 1930 was Malevich's last personal exhibition in his lifetime. The exact opening date is unknown. It is only known that the exhibition closed on the 1st of July, not the 5th of June, as was initially planned. There were about 50 paintings and dozens of architectonic pieces. This exhibition was the finale of Kazimir the Great, who was recognized as a genius in his lifetime.
The carpenter symbolizes Christ. It's the craftsmanship of Christ himself. He represents himself as an artist in this divine craft, foreshadowing his crucifixion. In one hand, he holds an axe, painted in yellow and blue, while a nail in matching colors rests in the other. Nothing about this is by chance.
In the summer of 1930, Malevich planned to move to Kiev with his family and friends, but fate had it her own way. The wave of repression in the Kiev Art Institute coincided with the arrest of Malevich in Leningrad. He was probably fired while he was behind bars. He was charged with espionage, but was released in a few months thanks to the advocacy of his influential friends. The prison conditions told on his health and caused a disease that killed him soon.
Now, when I visited last time Malevich in Leningrad in '32, he was a very depressed and sick man. He was not allowed to paint anymore. He was allowed only to paint his suprematist painting on little saucers, because that was a decoration. So it has a kind of social and practical purpose. But his painting had none. In principle, he was allowed to make portraits, and he made portraits. He made a living by painting portraits. In '35, he died. I saw him only, I would say perhaps an hour and a half. We talked, of course, about the film.
In his last years, Malevich worked even more actively. He painted pictures, wrote articles, and completed his autobiography. Feeling the approaching end, he prepared for it like for the last creative act. He wrote a script of his own funeral, drew a sketch of his suprematist coffin, and made his last will.
When I die, all artists of the world and all those who know me must bury me. And on my grave, they must put up a tower shaped like that column with the telescope to watch Jupiter. My face laughs and is distorted by convulsions of wisdom which weigh down on it. This makes me different from nature, because she never smiles. She has no grimaces of laughter. She is more perfect.